I saw a figure with no face walk towards my chair and kick it while I was exercising. It walked like it was chopped up frames in a movie or super sped up. I've seen that figure before many times in my dreams. I don't know what it is. At my grandparents' house, me and my bro were not allowed upstairs. No explanation why, just if you go upstairs, you will be grounded. Well, obviously, we went upstairs. We get to the top of the stairs and turn left, and there's this cold spot. Like literally, I was shivering. And it was in front of an airing cupboard. I look towards my bro, and he's white as a effing sheet, staring directly at the door behind me. He grabs my wrist and basically shoves me back down the stairs. I try to ask him what happened. He just shakes his head and refuses to tell me. A couple years ago, I asked him what he saw, and his entire demeanor changed. His eyes went glassy, and he started sweating, and he just says, "I don't know what you're talking about." To this day, I still have no idea what happened, but I'm glad my bro had my back. When I lived in a big house with a lot of other people, we would constantly see things move. What was disturbing is we had heavy metal doors with the things on top of them, so they would close slowly, even if you pushed them. We would constantly see them being slammed open and shut repeatedly, with the person on the other side of the door standing in terror. It's kind of interesting how we all hated each other, but kind of trauma bonded over that. When I was little, we lived in a house where way too many scary things happened. One night, I was thirsty, but too scared to go to the kitchen to get some water. 2 minutes pass. I hear the tap turn on the kitchen. I think, great, someone's up, I'll get up now. I was around 5. I go to the kitchen and I see my dad, sitting on the kitchen bench by the sink, just turning it on and off repeatedly. I said, "Dad?" He literally looked up at me, climbed off the bench, and started walking toward me asking for a hug. Thing was, he was moving weird, kind of like paper, like a flag, like a piece of material floating in the wind. He was walking towards me all flimsy and unbalanced. I flew to my parents' bedroom screaming for my mom, jumped into their bed, only to find my dad there, still in bed. You know that series, Haunting of Hill House? I'm not entirely convinced that it wasn't based on the house that I lived in from age 9 to 20. That pace was soul-sucking. Some stories I thought my father walk into the room and stop behind me, between the couches, pointing at the TV and the dining room table. It's a thing he'd do. I was like, yeah, there's nothing on, flicking through the channels. After I didn't hear him respond or walk away, I turned around and I realized I was alone. Another time, I saw a shadow figure in my father's bedroom as I was walking down the long and dim corridor. Other stories include the time my father felt something grab the blankets and coverings from the foot of his bed and shake them up and down. Or the time someone was heard walking on the front porch when there wasn't anyone out there, and a photo was taken which showed an unexplainable, foggy pillar. Or the time my younger brother saw our deceased grandparent sitting in his chair out on the back porch. Or the time I saw an unfamiliar man standing in front of what is now a boarded up doorway when I was playing on the back lawn. Or the time my father heard knocking along the slat boards in the corridor, which paused for the doorway before continuing on the other side and going behind a freestanding bookshelf. 2/3 of an old hotel it was, separated and moved down the hill from its original site. Looking at photos and videos of the house and ground fills me with real weird feeling, like nostalgia and love because it was beautiful, and deep dread because it was awful. There's a tall, shadowy figure that has been seen by various members of my family over a period of 20 years, though I have never seen it. The last time it made an appearance was when we bought a puppy a few years back, and my mother saw a huge black robed figure bent over the dog the same night, as if patting it, and the dog looking up without any fear. He's also been seen other times when new objects have been brought into the house, such as game consoles and even the washing machine, in some strange way, inspecting them. When people see him, they don't scream or feel any fear, which they agree is weird, as their emotions are numbed. They simply walk into their bed or turn over, go back to sleep, with the thing still actually there. Personally, I don't know what to make out of it. When my grandmother, who was visiting us, told us she had seen a large figure in her room, everyone was like, "Yup, Gran's seen it now." I'm not too worried, as it never hurt us. I guess if it was going to, it would have done so by now. I live in an old house. We've had typical things like hearing footsteps and lights randomly turning on and off. But the creepiest thing is every few months our bed just shakes. Wife and I wake up in the middle of the night to feeling like someone is constantly pushing down on the mattress and gently shaking it. One time we woke up to the Nesquik spread all over the counter with little handprints in it. I was an only child and we were hella poor, so Nesquik was a treat if we even had milk. We often drank it with water, so obviously we got in a lot of trouble for it. F you, ghost child. I was 9 at the time. Sometime prior to this, our family cat had passed away from old age. He was our first cat that I grew up with. He was a cranky but sweet boy. One night, I was the only one in the living room. I'm pretty sure my parents were out back while my brother was somewhere else entirely. And I remember specifically chilling on the couch watching TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw something dash from the kitchen to the stairs. I quickly turned around and saw a shadowy figure of a cat scurrying up the steps. At the time, we didn't have another cat, and we didn't get one for several months, so I knew it was weird. Without thinking, I followed this cat I was seeing up the stairs, but as soon as I reached the hallway, it was gone. I like to think that was our cat coming to visit the home one last time. I miss you, Furball. Well, when I was around 6 years old, I was walking down the stairs, no one was behind me, and all of a sudden I remember getting chills, then feeling a faint hand on my shoulder before I got basically pushed down the stairs. I was alright, a few cuts and bruises, nothing serious, but I still remember the feeling of the invisible hand on my shoulder. It still haunts me. I live in a city, and my brother lives in another city that is around 1,000 kilometers away. He visits sometimes, but not quite often. On average, once every 2 years. On one day, around 7 years ago, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room in my apartment. I woke up suddenly, my brother just sitting beside me. I was shocked and surprised, started greeting him, and asked him how he was doing, what a pleasant surprise it was. Next thing I realized, that it was a dream, and the doorbell rings, which woke me. Went to open the door, and guess what? It was my brother, who came to surprise us. Literally had me speechless. Don't have any explanation, and I think sometimes you don't need to have one. My mom and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside the recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes my mom or sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink." That's exactly how he'd ask my mom to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mom died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years. I was out with my parents, and it was late coming back home. At around 2:30 a.m., we were at a traffic signal. A homeless guy comes and knocks on the window of the seat where my mom was sitting. As she rolled down the window to give him money, he said, check what is happening at your brother's house." He proceeded to take the money and walked away. Probably thinking that he was a bit crazy in the head, we didn't bother and went home. Next morning, my mom gets a call from her brother's wife. He had a heart attack at 2:30 a.m. I was home alone in high school. It looked like car headlights were shining through our kitchen door, which didn't make sense because it was next to a field. I looked out the kitchen door, and the lights were coming from about 50 feet off the ground. It was a row of 3 white lights and 1 red light. I opened the door, and there was complete silence, and the whole field was lit up. I closed the door quickly, turned around, and it was gone. After my cat mysteriously died, we saw a large black cloud hovering above the house. It was not scary, it was calming. I like to think it was my friend. When I was a kid, about 10 to 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while my mom was doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs. It's really only attached at the top flight, but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair. So naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, well, guess I'm about to die, while almost airborne with my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on the other side of me, shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step, diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early with announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked towards the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell phone. She told me she was hitting up a few more stores. Still feels like a presence is on the stairwell and someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinister. Working as night security for a small office and sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at a security station to get in and out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check his ID and flip a few lights for him and go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas. I turn on the lights for him. No other lights are on. He's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody's in there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point, I went to check the cameras to see where he went, but not a single camera on except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the camera. At this point, I logged it as an incident and get the F out right as the relief showed up. Next day, my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could ever offer any explanation to what happened. I was about 15 and trying to sleep but having an asthma attack. Late in the night, I started hearing rhythmic breathing from the floor next to my bed. It wasn't scary, more comforting. And it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more effed up than that. It helped calm me down and get to sleep, even though I was still sick. I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time, I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was that it sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether a ghost dog came to visit me or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me. I was in college walking to class. Went to cross a busy street and a hand grabbed my shoulder quite hard and stopped me. A car zoomed by that would have killed me. Nobody was behind me or anywhere close enough to have stopped me. Guardian angel? One time my mom's doctor changed her blood pressure meds. It caused her to pass out on the kitchen floor. She had a near-death experience that's similar to what a lot of people describe. A tunnel of light, dead family members coming to see her, incredible feeling of joy. My uncle, her brother, was maybe 10 years older than her. Back in the 60s, he had a boat and used to take it from Florida to the Bahamas. It was a trip he had made many times. One day he left in the boat and vanished. A short time after, she was at work and her phone rang. It was a woman. "Is this Carol?" "Yes. I just wanted to know you that your brother died an honorable death." Then the woman hung up. This didn't happen to me, but a very nice old man and his wife used to live a few streets over from us. Well, when she got sick, his son flew up to help and watch and care for her. A few weeks later, she moved to hospice and later died. The night she died, her husband and son drive home, and they were talking about what to do for the funeral, and the husband asked, "Do you think she'd want some person to attend?" And they both said they heard the dead mom/wife in the back seat say, "No, thank you." I was in the kitchen cleaning up, waiting for my kid's bus. I saw it pull up, saw him get off. He didn't come in, but he started playing around with hiding under the window to jump at me and say, "Boo." So I thought that's what he was doing. But I walked out and he wasn't there. I called his name, looked around the house. He was thinking he was hiding from me, but I couldn't find him. I circled the house calling for him, and the parent panic set in. Probably only lasted 90 seconds, but it felt longer. Then his bus pulled up, and he got off. My son, who's now 10, was 4, and was able to name my grandmother by name by a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in a storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. She said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. His silly laugh, as we called it, was his laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left side of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh. My buddy and I were playing tennis one night at some courts by my house. Lights usually went out at 11, but for whatever reason that night they went off at a weird time, like 10:43. Whatever, that was weird. We collected our stuff and started walking to my car about 500 feet from the courts. My buddy's mom pulls up right as we're getting to the car and goes, "Where the hell have you been? I called your cell and some guy was just laughing. It didn't sound like you." It was my then buddy realized he didn't have his phone on him. He told his mom to call his cell again, and we could see it light up in the middle of the court we were playing on, by the net, but still definitely in between the single lines, not where we kept the rest of our stuff. He goes and gets it, and only has one missed call from his mom, the one she just made. He asks if she called the right number, and her call log shows 3 calls to his phone that night. We can't explain why the cell was on the court, or what happened with the calls, or what happened with the lights. It was surreal. Many years ago, my parents had separated, and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well, and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses really to get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seems really odd for something he'd been planning for a couple months. That night, I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house, and we're watching the news, and they report that U.S. Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know what my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front or back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me The night before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is Marine Corps Vietnam vet who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been to scare him from getting on the plane that morning. I was biking down a country road I used to live on. I think I was 8 or 9. On the way home, I saw a small humanoid-looking being run across the road from one crop field into a cornfield. The only details I could make out, and I still vividly remember, was that it was completely covered in yellow from neck to feet. I think it had green on its head. I told my mom about it, and all she could come up with was something out of the Cabbage Patch Kids. Never ever saw that thing again, but I still think about it from time to time. It was the size of a small child, about 50 feet away. Woke up to a weird feeling. Saw an opaque silhouette of a little boy standing on the other side of the apartment facing me. I turned on my light and it was gone. When I turned my light off, I saw it again. Flipped the light back on and went over to make sure there was nothing that could be causing a weird shadow. There was nothing that could have created that specific of a shape. It was standing in the pathway between my couch and wall, so it couldn't have been a shadow. I turned my light off, and again it was there. Flipped it back on, slept with the light on for the rest of the night. Couldn't sleep without the light on for days. Went with my brother to see an old family property my mother had inherited in a really rural area. We were just looking about. It hadn't been lived in for decades. A bit of wind, a bit of rainy day. Both me and my brother were inspecting the house until we started hearing a weird, rhythmic knock coming from around the building. Just a knock at regular intervals, much like clock sounds, but a lot louder. We stopped out to look around, but the noise started sounding like it was getting further away from us, until it disappeared. We left shortly afterward. A couple of days go by, and I stopped in by my mom's. I asked her if she has any pictures of the original owner of the house, which was her grandfather, so my great-grandfather. She pulled it out, and guess what? The man had a wooden leg as a result of a war injury. Told my mom all about it. It was like she was remembering him. She says exactly how it sounded when he walked on the porch. Weird as F. It's possible it was a bird tapping on wood somewhere around, but as far as I know, birds that do tend in very rapid fashion. In my story above, the knocks were about 2 seconds or so apart, quite a bit different from how an animal usually behaves. I'm not into supernatural stuff, but dang, that was eerie. There's this old jailhouse in my city. It was used both to house people awaiting trial and people who were about to be executed. The top floor was used for executions. There was supposedly much violence before it got shut down, and supposedly even more murders and gang wars inside the building after it was abandoned. Can't legally go inside, but people have reported some weird crap. One supposedly saw shadows and distorted bloody faces in mirrors. Another went to the top floor where they saw a bloody noose. Then they were pushed and fell down 10 floors. I kind of want to explore this building, but also don't. Crackheads are scarier than ghosts. Near my friend's house, there was a collapsing farmhouse down an old field road. It was called the Lazy W. Supposedly, the farmer who lived there murdered his family, and their ghosts would occasionally drip blood on the road. I was very interested in ghosts, so we had a sleepover one night in the 5th grade, and the next day we walked down to the Lazy W. It didn't seem to haunt me, it just seemed like a place where an old farm used to be. There was a lot of those, but then we noticed the blood. "See," she exclaimed, "I told you it was real." Her little sister took off down the road. She couldn't handle it, but my friend and I stayed to look for the ghosts. We sort of found them. I noticed a bunch of birds on the power lines, and one of them took a crap. It was dark red, almost purple. Then I realized something else. There was a bunch of wild pokeberries surrounding the collapsed farmhouse. Pokeberries are poisonous to humans, but birds love them. They can also use to make reddish purple dye. White bird poop, reddish purple dye, looks a lot like blood. Ew, right? So as it turns out, there were no bloody ghosts. There was only bird crap. I grew up on a countryside in a super small village in Germany. No man's land, as I used to call it. Some of the old farmhouses weren't situated within the village, but on the fields down the road. One of them was just a ruin. We often went down there as children, looking through the dusty windows. There was a table with plates and some glasses on it. Some of the buildings on the farm were just old stone walls. It was surrounded by high trees and therefore layered some darkness. An old lady often went there with her old rusty car. She had long gray hair, didn't like people around. We'd hide behind the trees till she was gone. One day, I went to the fields to do some nature photography. And of course, I went to the farmhouse as well. Made some shots of the buildings and the trees. Nice atmosphere, you know? Then suddenly there was a cat staring at me. How cute. Then there was another and another, all over the place, on the roof. Behind the old walls. They came from everywhere, like 30 cats or something, just sitting there silently staring at me. I very, very slowly went back, not turning my eyes away from those cats, walking around the bushes and trees to the field. Took my bike and went away. The building was bought by a photographer a few years ago, and now it's a pretty place to live. But for us, it will always be the cat house. I lived in the spooky house growing up. My mom still lives there. The house is unique in its style. It's a 2-floor shotgun-style home, which is more unique because it's in the northeastern part of the country, not in the southern part where shotgun style is more common. The property has a large lot, which was split into 2 fields, now more open, but my mother has stopped having it mowed, so it's going back to nature. The house is old. As far as anyone could tell, it was built prior to the town's corporation in 1872. It was the main part of the larger piece of property. When I was growing up, it was always painted a dark color, red and then dark brown. The house gives off weird vibes, and there are parts of the house and property even my mom won't go to. It's going to be sad when she passes. The property will be split up, and the house will be torn down for a newer build or access road to the land behind it. Growing up, weird crap happened consistently, and we weren't even allowed to have a Ouija board in the house, even as a joke. The house right on the corner of my street has something effed up going on with it. In the 15 years I've lived in my town, 4 of the inhabitants have died, 3 of them in the house. It's a rental, so it's not super weird that people cycle through it often, but I honestly don't think anyone's ever lived there for more than a year. In my town, we have the Mount Morn Plantation. It's a plantation home, currently a private residence or museum, I don't know, but it's been cared for since way back. And at Halloween, people can take haunted tours of the plantation. Since I was a kid, everyone in my town said that plantation has slave bones in the basement. And we all believe each other. Had a shack from the late 1800s in the neighborhood. All the kids said if you went in it, you would disappear. Another rumor was that there was a witch that did a murder and suicide there and haunted the house. It's in some park right now as a tourist attraction, I think. I remember as a kid going past gravel lot daily on my way to school. I never thought much of it, but my dad told me the history of it one day in passing. He told me there used to be a house on that old lot that belonged to a divorced lady with 3 kids. Her ex was a gold-plated a-hole who more or less abandoned her and refused to support the family. She worked, but it wasn't enough, and finally received eviction notice. The kids were hungry. Her ex was being an even bigger a-hole than usual, and the eviction notice was the icing on the cake. She went mad and began attacking her children with a hammer, killing 2 immediately and catching one in the head as he tried to run out the door, leaving a ring of blood splash on the ceiling from it. As time went by and the horror faded, the house was put up for sale many times. But people wouldn't buy it or never stayed long. My dad told me you could hear screams, children laughing, and footsteps. Objects would move and the bloodstain on the ceiling where the mother had hit her son as he ran out the door kept reappearing. no matter how many times the area was painted over or the panels replaced. Eventually, it was abandoned and tore down. Now it's just a gravel lot sitting there where the house was. I used to live in a basement apartment when I was in grad school. The landlady lived in the main house, and while she herself was a super nice and cool, her house was always very off to me. However, she charged a reasonable amount of rent, and I was only 2 miles away from school. About a week or two after I moved in, I had gone to bed and the apartment was pitch black at night. If my landlady ever wanted to speak to me, I would hear the doors above the stairs unlock and she would call out to me. One night, I heard the movement on the steps, but I didn't hear the unlock of the doors. It was probably 2 a.m. She certainly didn't call me saying she needed to talk to me. I hear these heavy steps descending the stairs, but I'm so scared that I shrink further in my bed to hide. The floor begins to creak towards the door, and then nothing for a few seconds. I'm not sure if it's safe to relax and go back to bed. Then I hear the door, start to turn. My fear makes me so scared that I pull the covers over my head to hide. I prayed the whole time under the covers. The next thing I know, it's finally morning. I stayed in that apartment for 2 more years. When it was my graduation, I slept in a hotel because there was no room for my family to sleep. That night in the hotel was my first peaceful sleep, what felt like forever. I lived in this house for nearly 20 years before anything happened. One night I woke up and felt a male presence. I looked and saw a tall shadow figure in the corner of my room. It didn't do anything but just stand there. This happened a couple more times before I told my mom, who said, "Yeah, there's spirits in their house, but they're good spirits." About 4 months go by. It wasn't happening as much anymore. One night, I woke up to this figure leaning over my bed in my face. I freaked out and jumped up, screaming, but nothing came out. It was straight up one of those scenes in the movies where people wake up right before they get stabbed. Moved in about 5 years ago. When we moved in, the past owners told us that someone died of lung cancer in the house. When we first moved in, every night we would hear banging on the walls. Either that or smell fresh smoke. It calmed down since the banging on the walls completely stopped. But us smelling fresh smoke never did, and we don't smoke. Also, every once in a while, smoke alarms will randomly go off. When I was little, I had a loft bed with a desk underneath. I've always been a pretty heavy sleeper. I could fall asleep at a concert, so it was strange when I began waking up at 3 a.m. every morning. What was even more strange was the noises coming from the attic, shuffling, knocking, boxes moving. My 9-year-old brain rationalizes the animal or bird that gotten in. After a few weeks of crap sleep, I decided to knock back on my ceiling and shave and haircut pattern because I was bored and hadn't interacted with whatever it was in the attic. I waited in silence for a few minutes till I was about to fall back asleep, and then I heard it. From the ceiling, a foot from my face. It knocked back the pattern. Every night when I woke up, I knock and sometimes get a response. It gradually stopped over the years, but I still wake up at 3 every night. It's weird, but it only happens in my room. I sleep fine in hotels and other houses. 13 years later, I've just been getting weird vibes around my house. I feel like I'm being watched. I sometimes hear someone saying my name, most notably before bed, whatever is really close to my ear. I can feel their breath as they whisper, and it freaks me out so much that it takes hours to get back to sleep. The shuffling in the attic also started up again, but I don't want to knock back anymore. There's a lot of weird crap that happens. Things get moved. My dogs and cats stare at the same blank spot. But that's just what currently has been happening. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often, they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least, that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and two little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was one big alligator and two small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!
The flesh of the unguided and non-believers fuel this void.